I want to start today with Trump's plan for the next 2 weeks and what is to follow. Like I mentioned yesterday, I fail to see how the legal path will take Trump anywhere further in the close deadline of January 6th, which is when the Congress will take up the electoral votes. I'm not saying that it won't happen, but from the looks of it, it seems that the White House will need to shift their strategies. There needs to be a stage 2 in place now. Therefore, I am outlining the important timeline that actually matters to us. The first date is December 18th, which is Friday. This is the day in which Trump's executive order from 2018 and the DNI must produce a report to declare any foreign interference. Now, the important thing to know is that this may be the precursor to declaring a national emergency, which allows the president to enact the Insurrection Act or use martial law. However, I do not see the announcement happening until next week, given that Friday is the last working day. The second date is actually December 23rd, which is the day that Barr will resign from his position at the DOJ. The date has two significant meanings. The first is that Barr will finish off a few things before he leaves for Christmas. Exactly what those things are is still unknown to the public. The second one is actually the new acting Attorney General, Jeff Rosen, who will be stepping in, as well as the new Deputy Attorney General. His name is Richard Donoghue. This means any actions by the DOJ will commence following the departure of Barr. At the DOJ, Rosen took a leading role in the antitrust law against Google, led by the department opioid case against Purdue Pharma, and was involved in a lawsuit seeking to delay publication of the book by John Bolton, who is a former national security advisor. However, it is also worth noting that Rosen came from Kirkland & Ellis, the same firm that Barr did. Barr chose Rosen in 2019 based on his experience in other fields than being a prosecutor. Interestingly, news sources express that Rosen relies on aides for expertise in areas in which he lacks experience, since he does not have any formal prosecution experience. The new Deputy Attorney General is even more interesting. Richard Donoghue is a former U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of New York. His office won conviction against El Chapo, and gang leader for NXIVM named Keith Raniere. Donoghue was previously an Assistant Attorney General for the Military Magistrate Judge and a lawyer with the U.S. Army JAG Corps. This is an important part. Donoghue served as the member of the 82nd Airborne, the exact same division as General Flynn. He was also a military judge, as well as a prosecutor. It's very unconventional that Trump named Donoghue as the new Deputy AG when he actually has way more experience in crime and military prosecution than Jeff Rosen. So why did Trump make such a move? I have some ideas. The first guess is that the Deputy Attorney General, which performs a different role than the Attorney General, because according to Study.com, the deputy authorizes foreign intelligence surveillance, is also the representative during Homeland Security and national security briefings, and he also makes recommendations in death penalty cases. According to the DOJ website, the deputy acts as the chief operating officer who oversees the department operation, including its enforcement agencies, litigation departments, and also 94 U.S. attorney offices. Along with that, its management and policy among other staff offices. Essentially, this role encompasses all the management command of the DOJ, which means Trump might be creating a DOJ subdivision that can possibly answer to his call, rather than the deep state. The disclaimer here is that all that is based on the grounds the two new attorney generals are actually going to help Trump. As well, Donoghue's father was JFK's personal lawyer. According to our history lesson, we know JFK attempted to, quote-unquote, manage the CIA, in which he was potentially killed for wanting to do so. Trump had used Memo 57 potentially to gain control of the military action last month. JFK's Memo 57 was created to keep the CIA in check when it came to managing foreign operations that could potentially limit CIA's paramilitary operation by allowing the real U.S. Army to take over. We had some guesses that the server seized in Frankfurt was done with the help of this memo. I'll give you the most optimal scenario here, which I think actually works. I'll explain why I think it's optimistic. First, we know Trump had the Insurrection Act and the military to fall back on. So basically, any plan and changes he plans to make with the new Attorney General, they're not going to be worse than Bill Barr. So then, speaking with this optimism, we say that the newly appointed Deputy AG, Donoghue, is on Trump's side. then this might explain why Barr resigned. He may be wanting to set up the case before December 23rd and just leave the work for the new Attorney General and the Deputy Attorney General. Barr may have done it because people will know he can no longer be trusted. It would be better to have two new personnel to do the dirty work. So we say that A.G. Rosen and Donoghue are going to be involved in charging the deep state and thus with any election tampering individuals. Well, since Rosen has no prior prosecution experience, who's he going to rely on? Of course, his deputy Donoghue, who not only has prosecution experience, but also military judge experiences. Again, this is just the optimal outlook. But then what would actually be the outcome? Well, based on the Martial Law and the Insurrection Act path, we will have to indict individuals very soon that are heavily involved with the vote irregularities. Since December 23rd is likely the last day to have anything done before Christmas and New Year's, at this point there needs to be decisive action by Trump. I think there are definitely preparations in place. I just feel that there is something he's wanting and waiting for. Maybe he's trying to catch the bigger fish. Maybe because January 5th is when Georgia has the runoff election. This is actually what we have to watch for, because it will expose the voter fraud and people will be aware of it taking place. Now, we also have to keep the Senate majority by ensuring that Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue wins. Interestingly, Trump retweeted Lin Wood's tweet. Is he waiting to give the Georgia governor and Secretary of State a chance to right their wrongs? Well, the next important date is January 6th. We talked about this in our last video. This date marks the joint session in Congress, where Vice President Pence will oversee the counting of electoral votes. This date is also when the dueling electoral votes will be challenged. However, as I said in the last video, the chance of overturning Congress at the current stage is getting slimmer. In the interview on December 14th with Fox News, White House advisor Steve Miller claimed that President Trump's allies are preparing to send Congress a list of alternative electors from these key battleground states, even though the electorate in the swing states have already voted Biden as the winner. But if President Trump succeeds in rejecting just one of these votes, Congress could then recognize the alternative list. He said, as we speak today, an alternate slate of electors in the contested states is going to vote, and we're going to send those results off to Congress. This will ensure that our all legal remedies will remain open. That means that if we can win these cases in the court, that we can just direct that the alternative slate of the electors be certified. That being said, the only chance for the Republican electors' votes to be counted is based on the precondition of winning all the court cases. Moreover, Republicans must win Supreme Court cases of at least 3 states for Biden's electoral college count to drop below 270. Over 1,000 cases are sent to Supreme Court every single year, but they only accept just a small portion of it. Given that the Supreme Court rejected the previous Texas lawsuit, my hopes aren't too high for the Supreme Court. In other words, I don't believe it is likely, as of now, that President Trump will be focusing on regaining electoral votes through state legislatures. Does that mean that President Trump doesn't stand a chance anymore in the legal battle? Of course not, but at the least, President Trump still has an opportunity to challenge the results of the election on January 6th. But if we can't get to the contingent election in Congress, Trump still has a chance to win because most states are Republican, provided we don't have any Reno voting. But President Trump's situation reminds me of Emperor Taizong, one of the most famous emperor of the Tang Dynasty. Before we start diving into this topic, let me fill you in on some Chinese history. Tang Dynasty was one of the most prosperous imperial dynasties in Chinese history. From the year 618 to 907, it was commonly seen as the golden age of Chinese civilization. The Li family founded the Tang Empire, and the second emperor of the Tang Empire, Tang Taizong or Li Shimin, was regarded as the greatest emperor of the Chinese history for his unparalleled achievements in arts, military, and foreign policies. 2 notable events took place during his time. One was the reign of Zhengguan, which marked the golden age of Chinese history, as we just mentioned. The other event is called Xuanwu Gate Incident, in which Emperor Taizong fought very hard against the corrupted officials, who also happened to be his own brothers. And finally, he had to take extreme measures and secure his ruling to prevent the Tang Dynasty from falling. A similarity between Trump and Taizong is that they both had faced a powerful force that wanted to subvert the current legal regime, which is what we call a coup. President Trump is facing a powerful force that is trying to illegally seize power, much like Emperor Taizong when he was competing with his brothers to gain the throne. Moreover, during the coup, they both exhausted conventional methods to attain a peaceful resolution. During the entire conflict, there were many assassinations on Emperor Taizong by his competing brothers. Similarly, there were many attempted impeachments on President Trump from the deep state, including the Russiagate. As well, there definitely can't rule out the attempts to assassinate Trump. Now, their effort to seek out a fair ruling from the higher judicial power were futile. Emperor Taizong was ignored by his father when President Trump was dismissed by the Supreme Court. In addition, they both made significant contribution to their respective nations. Emperor Taizong won most of the battles that laid the foundation for his father to establish the empire, and President Trump can be said to have made significant achievements in rebuilding the United States and made America great again. The most important force for both of them in this dire situation of battle is the support of the public. It guarantees the legitimacy for their extraordinary measure to quell the rebellion. Emperor Taizong initiated the Xuanwu Gate incident to protect himself from his malicious brothers, who repeatedly tried to assassinate him. It was a fierce duel between good and evil. In doing so, Emperor Taizong secured the throne and protected the country from falling into the villain's hands. Without his drastic measures, the entire dynasty would have fallen. Some narrow-minded people often portrayed the Xuanwu incident as a court drama between brothers fighting for the throne, which sort of completely overlooks the underlying morals of this event. In the future, we may have to have an in-depth discussion of the incident and its historical connotation behind it. President Trump's current situation is quite similar. He's faced with defending the very fabric of American values and the freedom and democracy from being overthrown by communism. It's also a fierce battle between the good and the evil. As of right now, the legislative, executive, and the judicial branches are controlled by the opposition. The regulations that were meant to suppress outside interferences have been used to attack patriots that are standing up for justice within the nation. Waiting passively won't benefit President Trump, as I've repeatedly mentioned, as the current conditions are unable to offer him a fair outcome. The legal battle will continue, but objectively speaking, the most meaningful tool that President Trump has is his own hands, and neither the Supreme Court or the Congress. Now, this tool is the 2018 Executive Order. It's the only resolution that I can think of for now that President Trump has for America. Now, this hardship is a test. It is nothing more than a test, though. We already know the results. We know who won the 2020 election. Therefore, we already know how this will end. We just have to wait for the step towards the results. Now, the test is just when the whole world is against you, who are your real friends? Who are your real supporters? Is it the Republican politicians? Is it the White House staff? Maybe. But when both Tang Emperor and the Trump had was the will of the people. That is what matters. The Insurrection Act was invoked numerous times during the 20th century. Most famously was when Dwight Eisenhower sent the 101 Airborne Division to enforce the desegregation of the public school in Little Rock, Arkansas. But the origin of the Insurrection Act dates back more than 200 years to a bizarre chapter in American history, when Aaron Burr plotted to raise an army to establish his own dynasty in either the Louisiana Territory or the Mexico. Now, Burr was a decorated Revolutionary War officer and a senator from New York. He served as a vice president during Thomas Jefferson's first term. Burr had grand political aspirations, but then it all went dashed when he killed his rival Alexander Hamilton in a duel in 1804. We also had the case when it was enacted last, during the riots of the killing of Rodney King in 1992. The standard of the Insurrection Act is to first have a sort of physical rioting or confrontation or civil disorder. Now, this would have been the case back in June of this year due to the widespread rioting and protesting. However, former Secretary of Defense Mark Esper opposed Trump's desire on that and was eventually never enacted. In short, the Insurrection Act is often done to physical violence situations, but the founding father Thomas Jefferson seemed to not have considered the potential of civil unrest done over cyberspace. So who would have thought that in 2020, the attempt at civil coup would be done in the name of presidential election over electronic spaces. So then let's move on to the martial law. According to Military Times, in short, the martial law can be imposed when civil rules fail, temporarily being replaced by military authority in a time of crisis. Though rare, there have been a number of notable US cases where military law came into play, including in time of war, natural disasters, and civic dispute, of which there has been no shortage of in 2020. While there's no precise definition of martial law, a precedent for it existed wherein certain civil liberties may be suspended, such as the right to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures, freedom of association, and freedom of movement. And the writ of habeas corpus, right to the trial before imprisonment, may be suspended. Now, the writ of habeas corpus is what prevents the military from immediately taking action to its citizens. Now, this needs to be suspended because in order to directly arrest people, we have to have that gone. Because the definition of the martial law status is so broad and there has been a wide range in history as to who and when it was declared, it's hard to categorize it and define the actual requirements. Therefore, I actually think it's more likely for Trump to use martial law rather than insurrection, simply because it fits the situation a lot better. Martial law will need to show that their actions under the Declaration must abide by the US Constitution and are also subjected to review by the federal courts. For example, Franklin Roosevelt's internment of US citizens and residents of Japanese descent during World War II, and also George W. Bush's program of warrantless wiretapping and torture after the 9/11 terrorist attacks. Now, The Atlantic reported that Abraham Lincoln conceded that his unilateral suspension of habeas corpus during the Civil War was constitutionally questionable, but defended it as necessary to preserve the Union. So yes, the martial law is open to question by the congressional and federal law community, but no, as long as Trump will obtain the proper evidence, it can be justified. It was done so in times of crisis, and we are in a time of crisis. One of the possible triggers to both the insurrection and the martial law is the 2018 executive order, which we're waiting for on December 18th. As well, with Trump's action in the military, he should have already obtained massive evidence that will justify the martial law. I think next week is when we will see this all in action. But we have to note that the deep state will have a military unit of its own, which potentially could lead to a violent outcome. Lawyer Linwood was warning and telling the citizens to prepare for maybe potentially 2 weeks of civil unrest. Better safe than sorry. He also has a list of apparently 1,000 Americans who are involved in this, colluding with foreign countries to steal the election. As well, on December 7th, there is an executive order which outlines the presidential office shall continue to work regardless of threats and conditions. Executive departments and agencies, including the executive office of the president, must maintain the capability and capacity to continuously perform the national essential functions, as defined by the PPD-40, regardless of threat or condition, and with the understanding that adequate warning may not be available. Agency heads must fully integrate preparedness program, including continuity and risk management, into day-to-day operations to ensure the preservation of all NEFs under all conditions. The definition of such order is as follows, based on this FEMA article, which says the 8 functions and overarching responsibilities of the federal government to lead and sustain the nation and the president and national leadership will focus on during a catastrophic emergency that therefore must be supported through continuity capabilities. The order then talks about, I am signing the Federal Mission Resilience Strategy, which should be implemented to increase the resilience of the executive branch. Implementing the strategy will reduce the current reliance on reactive location of personnel and enhance a proactive posture to minimize disruption. Distributes risk to the performance of NEFs and maximize the cost effectiveness of the actions to ensure continuity of operations, continuity of government, and enduring constitutional government, which means that Trump is relocating the structure of response from reactive to proactive, preparing for something. Though the order says within 90 days a report must be made, it does not mean it hasn't been done. In the case of martial law or civil war case scenario, could this executive order be used to sustain the function of the president's office with the exclusive involvement of the DNI, State Department, and Defense Department? Could this be Trump's next move in writing? We'll have to stay tuned. Make sure you subscribe and hit the notification. We always premiere on YouTube at 8:30 p.m. Tune in next time at Beyond the Noise. As always, I'm David Zhang, and have a good night.